For every centenarian who smokes and makes it to 100, there's like 1 million smokers who die before the age of 100. So it's a very minority of cases, like example of the survivorship bias. Anyone over the age of 100 already has fairly good genetics to begin with in order to reach the age of 100. So there's not a lot you can learn from their like recommendations or lifestyle, because they'll say things like whiskey every day, ice cream every night, pancakes in the morning.
Hey everyone, welcome back to MindHack, where we geek out about psychology of getting better at, everything. I'm Cody McLean, and I've got someone pretty cool with us today. You know those people who seem to know everything about staying young? Meet Siim. He's written not 1 or 2, but 8 best-selling books about optimizing how we live and age. Siim looks at longevity through his unique lens, one he got as a background in anthropology, which is studying human societies for those who dozed off in social studies. And he combines that with cutting-edge science to figure out how we can actually hack our biological age. You heard that right. We can actually influence how old our bodies think they are. His new book, The Longevity Leap, turns a lot of conventional wisdom about aging on its head. You know how most doctors wait until something's wrong before fixing it? Well, Siim's got a different take. He's big on this Benjamin Franklin quote, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." We're going to get into some wild stuff today, like why some people hit 100 and still play tennis, while others feel old at 50, and what science says about extending not just our lifespan, but our health span. So without further ado, please welcome Siim. Siim, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
When I was researching you the other day, I learned, as you say, that your grandfather passed away at just 36 from colorectal cancer. I'm curious whether that experience or something else entirely is what led you to develop such a deep interest in studying longevity.
Yeah, I do think that it was one of the origin stories for me getting into preventive health. And so that was like something like 21 years old back then. And I was already into fitness and exercising and those kind of things. But just thinking about things and thinking about life, thinking about my grandfather's death made me want to not get a bunch of like chronic diseases early in life and to try to prevent them from happening in the first place. So that's obviously one of the best ways to, increase your longevity is to make sure that you don't get a lot of these chronic diseases early in life that tend to kill people. But there's also the anthropological side of why I got into it. So I studied like anthropology and always been interested in the human species as like an animal or a creature. And, living longer is one of those things that is becoming increasingly more possible for the human species. We're not going to be living to the age of like 300, 400 or something like that in the near future. But, theoretically that is possible. It's not like out of the scope of science. So there are like a lot of other animals that live hundreds of years. And theoretically, you could also extend human lifespan for many decades at least, not to maybe even up to several hundreds of years. So as an anthropologist, I'm more about interested in of this idea as well of all the like implications that come with that, biological implications and ethical implications and those kind of things. How does your consciousness contribute to this, etc. So I'm not only interested in about my own health in sense of trying to live longer, but also as an anthropologist or a philosopher or like that, trying to think about how it's going to play out.
When researchers look at those who are in the centenarians, when there are people who live past 100, oftentimes they've credited their longevity to things like daily martinis, smoking cigarettes, cheese puffs, or ice cream. I think there is research showing that centenarians who are delaying chronic disease in some cases in upwards of 24 years compared to the rest of this. So I'm curious if you can explain what's going on. Are these just outliers? Are they just lucky? What are we missing about how the human body ages?
Yeah, there are some people who do live significantly longer than the average person. So depending on the country, the average life expectancy in the developed world is somewhere like high 70s, early 80s. So in like Japan, it's over 80s. In USA, it's like 79 years old right now. So that's the average expected life expectancy at birth. But, that's a lot of things that can contribute to that. But there are centenarians who live over the age of 100. And, the reason for that can be, sometimes attributed to a healthy lifestyle and staying physically active and not smoking and not doing some sort of other risky behaviors. But in most cases, the centenarians don't have like exceptional lifestyle habits. They don't have like some exceptional diets. They have very similar lifestyle as everyone else. But whether that be because of luck, some genetic differences, or they're at the right time, they take care of their health or something like that. They end up living significantly longer than the rest of us. And in a lot of cases, I think in the majority of cases, why the longest living people, like especially the super centenarians, so people over the age of 110, those are like genetic anomalies, for lack of a better word, that they have very favorable genetics for a lot of the chronic diseases that kill the average person, such as heart disease and cancer and kidney disease, etc. So they do get those same diseases, but they get them, like up to 20 years later than the regular person. And these genes, they obviously, they're in the same families. So if you're the offspring of a centenarian, you have something like 60% lower risk of getting heart disease. If you have someone in your close family, especially like mother or father, who has lived over the age of 100. So you have significantly lower risk of these chronic diseases as well. And you have a very high likelihood that you will also reach centenarianhood into your 100 years of age. And, a lot of the centenarians might also smoke. That it's kind of like a joke almost even that my grandfather smoked every day, like ate bacon and ate a lot of sugar and all those things, had bad habits, but he still made it to 105 or something like that. Well, that's an excellent example of genetics. So like for every centenarian who smokes and makes it to 100, there's like 1 million smokers who died before the age of 100. So it's a very minority of cases, like example of the survivorship bias. Anyone over the age of 100 already has, fairly good genetics to begin with, in order to reach the age of 100. So there's not a lot you can learn from their like recommendations or lifestyle, because they'll say things like whiskey every day, ice cream every night, pancakes in the morning, or whatever the reason may be, not having children, etc. So you can't really take their advice for that, because they don't have the scientific mind to interpret why they live so long, and also they tend to have very good genetics that, despite their, let's say, not optimal lifestyle and not optimal habits, they still made it to 100. Because if we, everyone else, like we start to smoke every day, we drink whiskey every night, we're going to get some sort of a chronic disease in our 50s, 60s, or 70s.
And some additional stats that I have in front of me is that, for historical context, pre-1860 global life expectancy was under 40 years old. And right now, the average is around 73.67. But it's projected that by 2100, or 2100, I suppose, is that the projected lifespan is going to reach 82. And so it seems that, I think there's an increase in, obviously, healthcare, medical advances that have had a dramatic impact on our increase in life expectancy over the past few decades. But I think we're going to see another increase simply from this interest in how to extend aging. And I think it's a stark contrast that we go from, say, your grandfather, if I'm correct, who died at 36 from cancer, We go from that in Soviet era Russia or Soviet era Estonia, apologies. And now we're at a point where we're looking at asking ourselves these questions about how do we reverse aging. I think that's just an amazing journey for us to have gone in such a short period of time. So one of the things that I think a lot of people are just interested in, and I know this is not a quick answer that you can just give, like, you got to eat healthy and exercise more. I know those are two components of this, but what are some of the most important things that people can do, like pound for value, in terms of decreasing the amount of aging that they're experiencing?
It's important to maybe differentiate between lifespan, so that's your maximum lifespan of how long you live, and also healthspan, which refers to the disease-free years in your life. So that years without some chronic disease that would have like debilitating effects. So like a stroke or kidney disease or diabetes or something like that. So we don't necessarily, yes, there is the concept of biological age, which theoretically would refer to the health and the health status of your body, so to say. And you have the chronological age, which refers to how many years it's like progresses linearly. Every year goes by, one chronological year increases. Whereas with biological age, it can be influenced by a lot of factors like your genetics. Some people just age faster because of genetics. But of course, the environment is more important in a lot of cases than the genetics. So to say, so how healthy you are, whether or not you get a lot of these chronic diseases, etc. So I think that the most practical like philosophy or like a North Star to follow is to just try to delay these chronic diseases for as long as possible. Because like I said, this is the key reason, why centenarians live decades longer than the average person. So they have the genetics that protect them against these chronic diseases. But the practical outcome is that they get the disease 20, 30 years later than the average person. So they start to age, or not age, they of course age from the moment they're born, but they start to see a decline in their health a few decades later after they get the chronic disease. So they have an extended health span because of their genetics in a lot of cases. And regular people, we all have our, different mixed bag of genetics. We have good genes, we have bad genes. There's thousands of genes that affects our longevity and health. And we can really never rely on that. So what we can still control is our lifestyle. So with these healthy lifestyle principles, obviously exercise, eat a good diet, don't be overweight, sleep enough, don't smoke, don't drink excessive amounts of alcohol, etc. You're maintaining health for longer. So your body is naturally declining in health. So even starting in your 20s, you already see a decline in skin collagen, you see a decline in your VO2 max, muscle strength and muscle mass start to decline a little bit later, so in your 30s. But the decline already begins. It's just that you're not really noticing it until maybe your 40s or 50s, depends on the person. But the decline already begins decades earlier, and the same applies to heart disease and Alzheimer's. Heart disease is a very slow kind of a disease, takes decades to develop, and they actually find that it pretty much starts from birth. Like even these autopsy studies on children who've died during like car accidents, they see that they already have this atherosclerotic plaque buildup in their arteries, and like people in their 20s already have this atherosclerosis. It's just very small, undetectable, and it takes decades, usually in their 40s, 50s, 60s, where it begins to be noticeable. So you want to delay that as much as possible with the healthy lifestyle that would, reduce your risk of these chronic diseases. And of course, there are a few of these chronic diseases that end up killing the most people. They're like heart disease, cancer, neurodegeneration, kidney disease, and diabetes in the like developed world. These are the top killers, but they all fall under a very similar umbrella of lifestyle practices. So don't overeat too much food, maintain a slightly slimmer body weight, leaner body composition, get enough sleep, exercise regularly. You don't need to become like an athlete, although like athletes do typically live slightly longer than average people. But yeah, you want to be, physically active quite regularly and, do both cardio and resistance training. And from a diet perspective, then there's a lot of different diets out there, different opinions, but the main, I guess, thing you can't go wrong with is just like a healthy whole foods based diet. So trying to minimize ultra processed foods and eat generally whole foods like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, meat, eggs, fish, grains, olive oil, those kind of things, dairy, etc. So if you just eat those foods and, I think like a 80-10, 80-20 or 90-10 rule, so that like 80 to 90% of the food is whole foods, then 10 to 20% can be ultra processed or slightly processed. That's not going to like affect your results that much. And I guess, yeah, one, like the way how do you know how well are you doing? Then, the obvious answer is to like test things and measure. So tracking your blood work regularly, I think, is one of the most underappreciated, let's say, methods or tools for improving your longevity. Because with tracking your lipids, your inflammation, your visceral fat, your cholesterol, and blood sugar, etc., you get an insight into, okay, how healthy you actually are, or what's the state of your body. Because all these chronic diseases, they also have a set of biomarkers that are associated with increased risk. So for diabetes, if you have very high blood sugar levels, then your risk of diabetes is significantly higher, or you might already have diabetes. If you don't measure it, then you don't know. And if you measure regularly, preemptively, you can see, okay, are you heading in the wrong direction? Are you slowly creeping towards diabetes? So to say, like, it's not going to happen overnight. And there is a slight worsening of the trend already before you get the disease. So you can course correct if you track regularly. But unfortunately, a lot of people might not do that.
Yeah, I have an interesting question for you. So I know you're not a doctor. You say that on Instagram. So I regularly track my own blood sugar through the glucose monitors, and now they're actually available in the United States without a prescription. One of them being Stello, Stello, and you can track your blood sugar. And then I also use a company called Levels Health, and they combine the data from your glucose, and then they'll look at any type of event, whether you exercise, what type of food you eat, and then you can log, say, hey, I ate this food, and then you'll see it'll give you a rating for how healthy that food was for you, because it'll track the glucose response. Now, I've regularly had kind of like this blood sugar that's right at the cusp of, like, if you were to just measure regular average fasting glucose level, it's at like about 100, which is like we're on the precursor to pre-diabetic. But my A1C is fairly low, and it's not pre-diabetic as a marker. I've been trying to find how can I lower this. And so is there any specific ideas that you would have or advice you would give for somebody who's trying to lower their blood sugar, but maybe it just feels like it's creeping up? And do you have any opinion on drugs or supplements like metformin, which I know Dr. Peter Attia was a huge advocate of metformin a long time, but then he stopped taking it partially because he noticed that there is a decrease in bone density as well as a decrease in ability to build muscle. And that's obviously a marker in helping you live longer. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on maintaining blood sugar glucose levels, especially if it just seems like it's high for no apparent reason.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that can affect the fasting blood sugar. So, how long you sleep, stress, and etc. I think, you look like a healthy person and looks like you exercise regularly. So usually from a diet perspective, like what I've seen is that it's kind of counterintuitive, but actually like a lower carb, high protein diet typically results in higher fasting blood sugar levels. And the reason is because if you're not really in ketosis because of maybe eating too much protein or eating too much carbohydrates, so you're like not in ketosis, but you're not getting enough glucose either, then your body will start produce the glucose, especially when you're sleeping, to prevent episodes of hyperglycemia. So with a diet, like if you were to be in like a very strict keto diet, you probably wouldn't see that. But if you're like eating a slightly lower carb and higher protein diet, then a lot of the protein can also be converted to the glucose, which then results in a higher fasting blood sugar level. I've seen online at least a lot of like carnivore like influencers or doctors. They also have slightly higher fasting blood sugar levels, although they're not eating any carbohydrates, but they're eating a lot of protein, which then converts that, and they have a slow, steady supply of gluconeogenesis, which is the conversion of the protein into glucose. Whereas, eating more carbohydrates, actually, from my own example, and a lot of people as well, is that their fasting blood sugar levels tend to decrease, because by eating the carbohydrates, your body produces the insulin, and insulin is the hormone that reduces blood sugar levels. So there's a lot of fear about carbohydrates online and these glucose spikes or insulin spikes, but there's been research that the people who actually produce the most insulin in response to a glucose challenge have the most robust metabolic health a few years down the line, because producing insulin isn't the problem. Having chronically elevated insulin levels, that's the problem. That's a hyperinsulinemia, which mostly results from this insulin resistance and not producing enough insulin, or like that's the kind of the side effect of that eventually. So, increasing carbohydrate intake might actually work and reducing the protein, although, I don't know what exactly your diet might look like. So that's, my opinion about this based on my own experiments, based on some of the studies out there. And a lot of people have like discussed this with as well. So like, yeah, having like a moderate amount of healthy carbohydrates and producing insulin actually lowers your blood sugar, because insulin is the hormone that actually lowers the blood sugar levels. And from supplemental side, then metformin does significantly lower blood sugar. Whether or not it has longevity benefits, it's hard to say. At least there's no evidence in humans, and I think the evidence in rats is also a bit limited, that the studies weren't done that properly, and it didn't actually increase lifespan in mice either. But it certainly increases life expectancy in diabetics, so people who have high blood sugar levels. So it helps to reduce the damage from excess blood sugar levels. Does it have side effects? Yeah, it probably can have side effects for some aspects of health. I think Peter Attia was also concerned about increase in lactic acid, which for his concern would be harmful for endurance performance and VO2 max. Whether or not that's true, I haven't dug that deep into that endurance side of the literature, but there's reasons to not take it if you're not a diabetic. So yeah, there's also like some safer alternatives like berberine that has a very similar blood sugar lowering effects. Of course, it's not as effective as metformin, but if you don't need a lot of blood sugar lowering effects, then berberine can provide those minor effects.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. I haven't received that from a doctor, because all of my biomarkers are pristine, other than what it appears my fasting glucose level is just a little bit high. So thank you. I think I might give that a try, even with the berberine, something I've considered or taken, but not on a regular basis. But on another note, from a perspective of what we can take for longevity, I know there's other things that have been popular, particularly in the realm of peptides, which have been just completely exploding recently. I mean, a peptide is, I believe, so you probably know the answer better than me, is it's a amino acid or a gastric juice. I'm probably getting it wrong, but most famous cases of peptides are insulin, and now more recently the GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, and with that, there's been a resurgence of people kind of looking at peptides as an alternative for health, something that doctors don't really know a lot about. And some of the ones that I think could be related to longevity, I'm not sure if you have an opinion on these, are epitalin, as well as NAD+, and possibly BPC 157. But I'm just curious, do you have any knowledge in the area of peptides related to longevity and health?
Yeah, I have done some research on peptides, and there are these small amino acid chains that are essentially like very safe because they're just amino acids in a sense. Of course, a lot of the peptides don't have that many human studies, if at all. Most of them are done in animals, especially like these PPC 157 and epithelol and those kind of things. But yeah, like they are thought to be beneficial for some aspects of, let's say, healthy aging. So BPC can have anti-inflammatory effects, can help with tendon healing, gut healing, gut-brain axis function, neuroinflammation, skin health, and gut health as well. So, there's a lot of hype or potential with those peptides, but yeah, the challenge right now might be that, we don't have, any human clinical trials for most of them. And a lot of, right now, mostly people are using them based on, animal studies and kind of taking a risk or, depending on the source. Like in the States, a lot of these compounding pharmacies, they're prohibited to use or to make or to sell these peptides, injectable peptides, but some of them can also be taken orally, which are still legal and allowed. So like oral PPC 157, and I've used PPC 157 myself as well, the oral one, and it definitely worked for me in healing like my minor tendon injury. But people definitely have to do their own research and kind of be careful with which suppliers are they, if they ever think about using anything of that, which suppliers are they getting from.
Yeah, and it's really like the Wild West out there right now. I know that reddit.com/r/peptides is a great, there's probably at least 3 or 4 like main communities just related to peptides alone on Reddit. They don't talk about sources, but the interesting thing here in the US, I'm not sure how it is in your country, but there's a lot of companies that sell peptides, but on the bottle it says, not for human consumption. And then they don't give you any information about how to use this or inject it, because unfortunately, a lot of peptides, they don't pass the blood or the blood gut barrier. So the absorption for a lot of these peptides is very small compared to when you inject it, which is effectively bypassing the immune system. But it is a Wild West. Sometimes I've read stories of people who take something and then they just get like a terrible reaction, or they say that they just feel really bad, and then like the first piece of advice is just like, well, stop taking this thing, But yeah, it's weird in this case. Like I know my doctor that I have, who's really well connected. He's really into Peter Tia, Andrew Huberman. So we're able to kind of jive on this aspect of even peptides. But unfortunately, most doctors in the US, this is not part of the medical training. And we're starting to see that this is becoming something that is, at least anecdotally, showing is very useful. And people, just the amount of stories, people who take, say, BPC 157 and say, like, their Achilles heel, like, healed like within weeks rather than months or something. There's just so many of these stories that it's becoming harder and harder to really deny it. But yeah, I think peptides are just fascinating, and I think they're going to be one of the areas of health that are continue to grow as more people find an interest in it. But outside of that, I know the other like big question I think people would have is really around supplements. Are there any supplements that you take or would recommend that people take on kind of a regular or daily basis as a means to help their body function? I think I was following like Brian Johnson. I'm sure you're familiar with him, the ex PayPal co-founder who is now all about longevity. And I think he has like a whole list of supplements that he takes on a daily basis, but it's like 20 or 25 different supplements. It's like insane. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what supplements we might be taking.
There is obviously more research with supplements. You have actual clinical trials and meta-analyses on a lot of supplements, so we can see, okay, they actually work, so to say. And I think the ones that I would say definitely would have beneficial effects based on the evidence would be creatine. So that's like usually considered as a sports supplement, but it actually has a lot of benefits on the brain as well. So cognitive aging, it's useful for that and memory. Then the second one would be collagen. So collagen peptides have also been shown to improve skin wrinkles and skin aging in multiple clinical trials. And the skin collagen already starts to decline in your 20s slowly. The third would be omega-3s, so EPA and DHA. Those ones have been researched for decades, and they consistently show benefits on cardiovascular disease risk. So they improve things like triglycerides, and they also seem to reduce the risk of cardiovascular events. So they have a lot of cardioprotective effects, also neuroprotective effects, and people who have like a higher omega-3 index, so higher amounts of EPA and DHA in their red blood cells, these people appear to have like a lower risk of these chronic diseases and a lower risk of all-cause mortality as well. A fourth supplement I would say is magnesium. So magnesium is one of those minerals that a lot of people are deficient in. So up to like over 50% of people aren't getting enough of the magnesium, and a deficiency in magnesium can have a lot of negative effects, especially on cardiovascular health. So magnesium deficiency can raise blood pressure, can cause endothelial dysfunction, can raise blood sugar, can cause dyslipidemia, can cause insulin resistance, and a lot of other problems. So I find it kind of a safe bet, or a safe thing to do is to just take like a magnesium supplement, because it's not that easy to get it from food, and a lot of people are already deficient. Plus it helps with like stress and sleep as well.
And is there a specific type of magnesium that you recommend?
My favorite types are like threonate, bisglycinate, and taurate. I think those are the top three. Threonate especially for the brain, and taurate especially for the heart. And bisglycinate is more so for like sleep and relaxation. And I think that's those are the most evidence-based supplement out there, in my opinion. There's a few more probably that have been shown to have benefits, like ashwagandha can have benefits on stress, sleep, and the testosterone levels. Although I don't think that it's like something everyone should take, whereas omega-3s, creatine, magnesium, and what was the last one that I mentioned? Those ones, they have benefits pretty much for everyone, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. From the research that I've done, and just being a big Andrew Huberman fan, one of the things he would recommend is 1,000 milligrams of EPA fish oil per day, which is actually really hard to get in over-the-counter fish medication. So actually, I have a prescription from my doctor for something called Vascepa, which is spelled VASCEPA. And it can be expensive without insurance, but it's effectively just 1,000 milligrams of EPA medical grade fish oil. So it's from like a good place. The quality is good, and that's actually prescribed for people who typically have high cholesterol, since it's been shown to really help decrease that. And magnesium for sure. I think I like to rotate between vitamin C and magnesium so that it's not just building up tolerance every single night. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, supplements are they're contributing maybe 10% of your goal towards optimal health and well-being and longevity. So these are just like cherry on the top. They don't have nearly as much of an impact as getting enough sleep, eating right, and exercising as much as you should. But on the point of exercise, I know that you said earlier that athletes, they tend to live longer. But is there like a specific amount of exercise? I think you mentioned in your book something of like 250 minutes of moderate exercise per week and maybe 150 or 200 minutes of intense exercise per week. So is that saying like if someone's crushing it at the gym like 3 hours every day versus somebody who's just kind of sitting on the couch, like what's the fine line here? When's when is somebody exercising too much to an extreme, and when are they not exercising enough? What's the sweet spot?
Yeah, we don't have like an exact answer to that. There's no way to like exactly measure that or to assess that. But there are, one recent review last year went through the major studies over the last 10 years or so. And based on all the studies, they collected the data from then. They concluded that the optimal amount of like vigorous exercise, so that's over 70% of your max heart rate. The sweet spot for that is something between 100 and 140, 160 minutes per week. That's slightly less than 3 hours. So that's a vigorous exercise. When you're doing sprinting, some sort of plyometrics, and weightlifting, etc. Now, with the issue with weightlifting is that you're not always in the 70% heart rate when you're lifting weights. Maybe, like immediately after you finish a set, you probably are with the elevated heart rate. But, depending how long you rest, if you do some powerlifting style of training, you can rest, 5 to 10 minutes sometimes. And your heart is going to be pretty normalized after a few minutes. So it's, imperfect data in that sense, because some people work out, 3 hours per day, but they do this powerlifting style that they rest 10 minutes in between sets. So it's hard to say, okay, which one is it? But I would say that, okay, if you do weightlifting 3 times per week, then that already maximizes it for the health benefits. And, 45 minutes each session is what I like to do. And I think that maximizes the benefits you get from resistance training for the muscle growth, strength development, bone density, etc. And anything above that tends to be like more for like other reasons or other benefits, more like athletic reasons. And this also would include like, high intensity cardio, etc. So if you do, everyday high intensity cardio, then based on the study that I just mentioned earlier, the review, then they did find that there was this slight U-shape association with high intensity exercise. That if you do too much, so like over 200 minutes per week, then that was seen to be associated with slightly higher risk compared to the sweet spot of 140 to 160 minutes per week. If you did less than that, you did only 30 minutes, then that was also not optimal. But if you get it too much, then eventually the risk started to provide like diminishing returns. And the other type of exercise they investigated was the moderate physical activity. So that's 40 to 60% of max heart rate. 40.
Is that zone 2 cardio?
So zone 2 is like 60 to 70%. So moderate physical activity would be like 40 to 60, and vigorous would be over 60%, if I'm not mistaken. And what they found was that moderate physical activity was pretty linearly associated with reduced mortality and reduced heart disease. So the more you did moderate physical activity like walking, hiking, some jogging, etc., the better it was for the risk of heart disease and mortality. So my takeaway from that study was that, yes, you want to do vigorous exercise, you want to hit the gym and you want to do some high intensity exercise, but not too much. So like 140 to 160 minutes per week appears to be like the sweet spot. And what I would want to do more would be the moderate physical activity. So more walking, more regular jogging, more cycling, more hiking. So this slower and less intense type of exercise that you can do for many hours. And they found that even up to 800 minutes per week of moderate physical activity. So even then you saw better like risk reduction. So even up to several hours every day that you do every day, like over an hour of moderate physical activity, that's kind of that will be the most optimal.
And I know that there was a research from the Journal of American Heart Association that showed for every additional 1,000 steps, up to 8,000 steps per day, at which the benefit kind of plateaued, it reduced mortality risk by 15%. So I think 8,000 steps, at least 8,000 steps, then I think you're in a sweet spot on a daily basis for longevity from a low to moderate cardio range. but exercise is one component of aging, and as well as food, which are probably like one of the two biggest. But I think there's another aspect of aging that it's not as glamorous, and I don't think it's talked about nearly as much as it should be, and that's the social aspect. And there's this really fascinating thing happening in Japan, as if I'm saying it correctly, it's called the hikikomori, where young people just completely withdraw from society. And unfortunately, we're starting to see that here in the US, and I think probably even around the world, because you have social media, and it's just really isolating everybody to a greater extent than it used to. And I think there was some research showing the importance of not socially isolating. So do you have any science, or have you done any research on how the overall, like the longevity framework fits in with our social and our need to socialize? And I think there was something that about it being just as bad as smoking, and if you don't get out and have friends or socialize.
Yeah, I have a chapter in the book about socializing and relationships. It is social isolation and loneliness are pretty bad, but they're not as bad as smoking still. So they are associated with increased heart disease and mortality, but not as much as smoking. And I think it's very kind of subjective as well. Some people get more stressed out, or they have worse mental health if they spend a lot of time with other people. And some people are fine being more kind of alone. I guess, yeah, the or how you define social isolation and loneliness is depends on the person. And I guess the subjective feeling of feeling lonely is what matters. If you are feeling lonely, then that's at least based on the research, is bad for overall longevity and mortality risk. So there's many things that can affect your lifespan if you suffer from a loneliness or social isolation. But it also, like, physiologically can just worsen your physical health. So, like, you can have higher stress hormones, higher heart rate, and those things. So, like, poor mental health has like a physical effect on your body as well that worsens your health. So that's why it is an important aspect of longevity. So if you're chronically in a state of this physical despair or physical stress, then that will wear your body out much faster as well. And a lot of these hotspots, longevity hotspots in the world, they are the smaller communities where families are kind of closer and more with tighter social ties, and that I think certainly has an important role in their longevity as well. So not only are they like physically happier, they have better mental health, but they also, if you're an 8-year-old person, then you fall off the stairs or something, you don't have anyone else to help you. You could be laying there for, many hours, and that could actually, be the end of it. Whereas if there's someone close by who can come and help you, then this is the luck component that I mentioned earlier. So some people, they might accidentally fall somewhere, and just perchance there's no one else to kind of call the ambulance, and they die because of that, or they get physically disabled by breaking their hip or something that then has a cascading effect on their physical health, and they die faster. Whereas if there is someone to immediately help them up or immediately call the ambulance, then that's kind of the luck component that actually extends their lifespan a bit more, because they get the medical help much sooner for that reason.
But surely there's more to the social isolation component, like in terms of maybe it raises cortisol. Like if you don't have friends, you can feel lonely. There's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. And I think when you're feeling lonely, you're feeling a certain level of distress, of lack of connection, maybe lack of purpose, and that causes you stress internally. So do you know what's the specific tie-in to how social isolation impacts longevity?
Well, I mean, the biggest effect can be like suicide or something, that you voluntarily end your life. So that's, obviously plays into life expectancy statistics and the mortality risks in the studies. But the physical stress component, it can, if you have higher stress hormones, higher elevated heart rate, higher blood pressure because of the despair or like the distress, mental distress, then that increases risk of heart disease, kidney disease, neurodegeneration, etc. So yeah, the risk of these chronic diseases does elevate as well from emotional distress, chronic emotional distress, and psychological distress as well.
And so is there a specific guideline as to what is recommended to avoid the negative effects of social isolation? Like, is there a specific number of friends? Is there a specific number of social interactions? Like, should you get married? Like, do you have any information on the research behind the social factors that are optimal for longevity?
In a lot of studies, it's so how do you like assess subjectively, are you lonely or socially isolated? Then at least one of the questionnaires is like, how easily do you have access to social support? So like on a scale of 0 to 100, if you're below 50, then that's usually associated with a higher risk of, or like it's associated with an unfavorable, let's say, profile from the social isolation perspective. So if you subjectively feel that you have a lot of access to social support, then you're probably not lonely or not isolated. Whereas if you feel that you're, you don't have anyone to share your like worries or problems with, etc., you don't have yet like someone to spend like time with either, then that will be categorized as then having a higher degree of social isolation and loneliness. So how do you like fix that? That's a hard problem. A lot of people might not be socially isolated or lonely because of their choice. It might be because of whatever circumstances, social media, or just modern lifestyle, etc. So it's a hard problem. I don't have the answer to that. And, I guess just appreciating your already existing friends and family and trying to reach out to them is kind of the first thing that makes most sense to address this issue. Like, it depends on their parents. Like, at least my parents would always welcome me with open arms and like show me support, but that's not the case with everyone. So, it depends a lot on the situation, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that kind of a social support for whatever reasons they might be.
Yeah, and I wonder how AI is going to play into that. There's already been instances of young adults or even children using AI or building relationships with AI, and I think that's going to continue to grow exponentially. And I think on one hand, it's great that there's this resource that people can turn to that it allows them to feel like they're being validated, because often that's what we lack, is we lack somebody to help us accept how we feel. It's very difficult to do that on your own. And that's why we need a therapist to ask the right questions, or you need a friend who you can just rely on and know that they're going to support you. And I think AI is filling that gap for a lot of people. But I wonder, if that's going to have some kind of down the line negative effects on our ability, again, to interact with people, because we're now in this society where, we're automatic cars, without a driver. And I would even find myself like, if it's me and an Uber driver that stands between having some place I want to go, there's something just inconvenient about having a driver there, and you have to like say hi or interact with them, even if it's like the smallest thing, or even if you're at the grocery store. Like, I will still feel the anxiety of, I have to interact with this person now. And I know that Gen Z is experiencing this to a much higher degree than previous generations. And I think it's to do with how much technology is really starting to wean its way into our everyday lives. And I would go to a restaurant and I would see like little kids on their iPads, And I so very hard want to judge that parent for letting them kids be at a restaurant on their iPads, because I'm sure you've seen it, that kids are just glued to their screens. And there's obvious evidence that it's going to have negative effects on their mental health. But simultaneously, if you ever ask a parent about why do you let your kids like look at this iPad, and they're just like, only parents can really understand it. And then I've seen glimpses of that, right, where it's just having a kid, it's so much work. And at sometimes you just want to say, here, just take the iPad and just, go off and do your thing. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this aspect of how we're raising our kids and technology, and maybe how AI might. I know these are all new questions, but it's just in case you have any thoughts on this, either way, of how technology is evolving and what you think our future is going to be like.
Yeah. So, obviously the the arrival of like robots and actual, like, let's say, more interactive AI will make it even more kind of complicated in a sense back, because then you could theoretically live your entire life, or like go through your everyday life without interacting any humans at all. Like you would, the waitress or the barista would be a robot who would be doing that. And so I don't know if the people would get anxiety, or like let's say some emotional socializing points, even like do they even feel that they're interacting with someone, if they know that it's a unsentient robot, although they might be speaking to them. So I think, yeah, it's a very kind of a complex issue. And I think it's probably gonna get worse over time, that people will start to live more and more in, I guess, their technology bubble, that they'll spend more time online. They'll spend more time in their online communities or these social circles that tend to, be, people want to do what they like, and they want to interact with people who like agree with them, or like they want to interact with people they're interested in. So they're gonna be kind of more and more living in this world where everything is to their liking, or at least the way they would like it to be, from a social milieu or a perspective. And I think that might just make people more, fragile mentally. So they say it's good for your mental health to be able to be like mentally resilient and anti-fragile in that sense, instead of being fragile. So you want to, we don't want to do uncomfortable things, and we don't want to be in uncomfortable situations, especially the social situations, but they're good for our mental resilience. And, in a sense, they're good for mental health, because then we condition ourselves to not get anxious if someone on the street asks us a question or whatever it is, which in the future might be more the case, that people will become more anxious and more afraid of actual human interaction, because they do everything online and they're always in their own tech bubble. But for mental resilience and mental anti-fragility, you want to actually, interact with that person, and interact with a person who you might disagree with, so to say.
Yeah, yeah. And hopefully the AI will actually help us, if anything, help us to overcome some of these negative effects of social isolation. But there's another growing aspect as well to overall like life satisfaction. Say if you're eating right, if you have enough friends, if you're really at kind of in some ways like Maslow's hierarchy, a pyramid of hierarchy pyramid, where at the very top, once you take care of your survival needs, you're thinking about why are you here? And unfortunately, spirituality or a belief in God, religion, it's been on the decline. And what happens is now that we have a void, there's been like a spirituality void in people, because when you don't have something that's higher than yourself, that's a more important being outside of yourself, there is no easy answer to explain why bad things happen. And therefore, you have to fill that gap yourself. And thus it's led to what many have described a crisis of identity, a lack of purpose, because now we're no longer worrying about where are we going to eat next, but now we're really kind of concerned with, well, why am I here? And if you don't have a God that you think is created a destiny, you have to create that destiny for yourself. And I know that in your book, you've talked a little bit about the Japanese concept of Ikigai. So I'm wondering if you can explain, how does this concept of Ikigai, or really like having a strong purpose, how does that tie into the longevity?
Yeah. So, ultimately, if you don't have a desire or a reason to live, then based on the research, you also have a shorter life expectancy or a higher mortality risk. And this, especially is seen in elderly people who they're like in their 80s, 90s, 100s, but there's something that kind of keeps them alive or motivated. So that can be the community, their grandchildren, or pets, a religion, or a job, or some sort of vocation, craftsmanship, whatever it is, that just motivates them to keep them alive. The effect is kind of mediated through a similar mechanisms that, if you want to die or something, then you will have higher stress hormones and higher, like, let's say, adverse physiology. Whereas if you have joy and happiness, you want to stay alive, then yeah, like it is true that your body will also have a better state of health because of the way your mind affects your physiology. So like you can literally change your physiology with your thoughts to a certain extent. Like you can change your heart rate by, thinking about certain things. If you think about sad and depressing things, then, or scary things or whatever it is, then yeah, you will have elevated heart rate. Whereas if you think about happy and enjoyable things, then typically we'll have a more parasympathetic or like more at ease body as well. But yeah, like the sense of purpose, Ikigai, is something that I think we should all have. So it's especially going to be useful if you're lacking motivation sometimes, or you're lacking consistency. So if you don't have a reason to live, or you don't have a reason to stay healthy, etc., then you will be more likely to revert back to some of the bad or unhealthy habits. So some people, I want to see my grandchildren get married or something like that. That's some of the goals that older people might set for themselves. Or I want to see the birth of my great grandchildren, or whatever the goal may be. Like that's a pretty big motivator. And when it comes to fitness, then I want to be able to lift my grandchildren up when I'm old, instead of being in a bed or using a cane, etc. So that's these kind of goals or these reasons to stay alive. They can be pretty powerful, and a lot of the times it just comes down to you start making better decisions. Like, okay, you want to live until your great grandchildren are born, then you're less likely to smoke. Whereas if you don't care about that, you care about the smoke in the immediate gratification sense, and then you're gonna just smoke continuously. So this kind of a trade-off that we all have to make, and we set our own purposes or goals. So there's no, I think there's no any objective right or wrong in this. We just have to think about what we want and what kind of goals we want to set for ourselves.
And on that point, I think there's Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, and this guy was in a concentration camp, and he noted just that the people who often lived, they had a will to live, they had a desire to live, they had somebody or something greater than themselves that they were there trying to serve. Maybe that was other people in the camp. Maybe that was a specific job. I think he's quoted as saying, he who has a will to live, or no, I know the quote and then I butcher it. He who has a why, I'm not gonna try it, but it more or less is that if you have a reason outside of yourself, then that's going to motivate you to live and persevere. And there's this interesting tie-in to this study of the pink elephant, or if I'm sure you've seen the video of the gorilla that walks past, and people are trying to like count how many times like the basketball gets thrown, but they completely miss this gorilla. But simultaneously, if you ask somebody to not think of a pink elephant, it's pretty hard to not think of a pink elephant when somebody's telling you not to do that. And so when you're focused on trying not to do something, your brain can't distinguish between whether you want to do that thing or not. And so if you're somebody who dwells in a lot of sadness or depression or what's wrong with you or the negative effects, then that's what your brain, that's what your body is really like taking in, is that you're depressed and that you feel terrible, you have low self-esteem. And so you have to shift that mindset to focusing on what you're good at. And it can be really difficult sometimes, but that, as you say, can have a dramatic impact on our life and ultimately have an impact on our longevity. So I think those are all important points when it comes to longevity, not just the other stuff like exercise and eat healthy, but our mind is an important component in that. And speaking of our mind, we have to really create the foundation to have a great mind and a healthy body. And a lot of that, it's not the goal that makes you, it's the thing that you do every day. That is really that's really what has the greatest impact. For me, I'm lucky enough. I have a Japanese hot soak tank. I have a sauna. I have a cold plunge, and I have one room, and I call it my mindset room. And I'm so proud of it. It's the first place I bring everybody when they come over. But I'm wondering what your kind of routine is that you've kind of settled on. It's something. What's your non-negotiable routine? What things do you recommend that people do on at least a semi-regular basis to help contribute to longevity and overall health?
I have a pretty simple routine and have like a lot of gimmicks or a lot of gadgets, etc. I exercise pretty regularly. I try to do something every day, but I do like gym workouts 3 times per week for 45 minutes. And I do cardio like twice a week currently for 45 minutes or something like that. And then on the other days, I'll do some maybe like brief intervals or some longer walks or yoga or some stretching, etc. So I do try to move my body every day, but I'm not doing some sort of high intensity exercise every day. With my diet, I think I follow like a Mediterranean diet. So lots of fish, vegetables, fruit, and nuts and seeds, and dairy, and eggs, etc. For my sleep, I have a regular sleep schedule, so I go to bed around like 10 p.m. and wake up 6 a.m. And I'll always try to sleep in pitch black darkness. In the evenings, I'll dim down the lights before bed, wear blue blocking glasses, and I'll sleep on like a cooling mattress, so that keeps the bed a bit cooler. And in the morning, I always try to get like bright light exposure, whether it be with like a red light therapy panel or some bright light face lamp as well. Most of my days are, structured around work. So I'm, a lot of in front of the computer, doing work, and I take breaks quite frequently. I have a small dog with my wife. We go outside, and it's a good way to, get more movement in, get more sunlight in. But there's a lot of research about the dog ownership is also associated with longevity. So, if people are socially lonely or something, then dogs can also be like one option that they can bring more joy or make you less lonely if there's no other option. And they're also it can be a sense of purpose for like elderly people. So if elderly people have pets, then usually if the pet dies, then they see also like a decline in their health because of that reason. And like having a pet is also like a motivator to stay alive. I need to take care of this thing, so I can't die. What else? Sauna. So I take a sauna about like 4 times a week. And somewhere like 20 minutes at 70 degrees Celsius. Supplements. What supplements I take? I take collagen. I take a trimethylglycine. I take creatine. I take whey protein. I take magnesium, omega-3s, vitamin D right now for the winter months, and vitamin K2 as well for balancing the vitamin D. I think that's pretty much it. So I have a very routine. Like I have a very consistent routine in the sense that days are quite similar, mostly because of work-related things that I like to follow like a routine.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that I grab with stuff that I do as well, and frankly I wish that there was more people interested in proactively improving their health. And unfortunately, I'm not sure how it is in Estonia, but here it's really doctors only prescribing medications after you're already sick. They don't really prescribe how to live healthier. It's not really something we teach in school. And so I have to hand it to people like you who are really sharing information on to how we can live healthier, longer lives. Because I think there's definitely a difference between somebody who's older and sick versus somebody who's older and livelier. And, we all want to be the latter. We all want to be the person who's able to live long and still have their brain with them. I've had older relatives, and it seems like a lot of people have dealt with somebody who has dementia, Alzheimer's, and those are just terrible diseases for them to wake up and not know who they are or who are the people around them, and just to be stuck in this as like a groundhog state, like over and over, just repeating like the same day. And so we all want to, I think, in the back of our minds, want to minimize that. And so I can only hope that content like the stuff that you make, as well as others online, can continue to help guide everybody so that we're making healthier choices and we're able to live longer and healthier, not only for ourselves, but for those around us. So with that said, Siim, I want to thank you so much for being here today. We've covered a lot, probably more than I thought we would be able to cover in this time. I know people can find you at siimland.co. That's SIIM land.co. Where else should folks go? Where can they get your book? Are you doing any other stuff that people can join?
Yeah. My social handles are all Siim Lund, and my book, The Longevity Leap, is on Amazon, so they can get it there.
I apologize for pronouncing your name wrong this whole time.
Well, that's fine. It's very common.
Siim, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today, and all those listening. Till next time, keep optimizing. Thanks again.
Thank you.